Hello everyone, my name is Joaquin, and today we're going to talk about what is perhaps the weirdest and most idiosyncratic political system in the world. So I'm Ecuadorian, a citizen of a small South American country, cleverly named after the equator, that many people haven't heard about. Growing up, politics wasn't something that you really wanted to think about. Most of our leaders are disliked by most of the people, all politicians are considered to be corrupt, and you really have very little faith that the government's going to be doing something useful. So naturally, the population is broadly disenfranchised with politics, and no one's really excited about who's in charge. Right or left, center or socialist, chances are that the president is a corrupt populist. You're just hoping that the people in charge aren't too corrupt and that they don't plunge the country into a Venezuela-like hellscape. And honestly, the people have good reason to have such low expectations. Significant scandals rock almost every administration, ending in an abrupt change in government and policy. In the 200 or so years that Ecuador has been around, we've had a whopping 20 constitutions, averaging one constitution every 10 years. So basically, every time a new president comes into power, he's like, let's make a new one, boys. And the high turnover rate isn't just limited to constitutions. I'm 22, and in my very short life, Ecuador has had 8 presidents, averaging one every 3 years. So because of the extremely low expectations that Ecuadorians have from their government and the high political instability, politicians here can get away with some really egregious stuff and try to implement some very harebrained ideas. And what better place to start discussing the stupidity in politics of Ecuador than by focusing on our most foundational legal document, the Constitution. The current Ecuadorian Constitution was established in 2008 by the National Assembly of that time, which was dominated by the country's leading socialist party, País Alliance. It is unsurprising, then, that the Constitution is filled with pie-in-the-sky ideas about the rights that the government supposedly guarantees. Here in Ecuador, we have the constitutional guarantee to information and other communication services, even though everyone has to pay for their phone and everyone has to pay for their internet. The right to decent housing, even though many people live in very squalid conditions. And the right to health, not health care. As Ecuadorians, we have the constitutional right to health itself. What's more, persons have the right to goods and services of the highest quality. You heard that right. If you're Ecuadorian, by virtue of your citizenship and our magical wish-granting constitution, you should have the expectation of driving a Ferrari to work every day and living in a McMansion. After all, it is our constitutional right to have all the goods and all the services of the highest quality. It says so right here. But of course it's all a fantasy. Ecuadorians are subject to the laws of economics like everyone else, and unlimited abundance is still relegated to the realm of science fiction. It's almost as if calling something a right does not make that thing universally available. Unfortunately, the economic reality is not subject to pandering proclamations or empty promises. And the flurry of rights doesn't just end with human beings or with infinite material prosperity. No. The Ecuadorian Constitution is the first in the world to propose that nature has the right to integral respect for its existence and for the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles. Sounds great, right? Interestingly enough, a couple lines before this grand proclamation, the Constitution also guarantees the rights of people to benefit from nature and to exploit it. Unfortunately, the Constitution does not address what is to be done when the supposed rights of nature are in conflict with the rights of people to benefit from nature, as tends to inevitably be the case, especially in a country in which 80% of exports are a direct result of extractivism. During the past decade that the Constitution has been in place, what the government ends up doing is citing the rights of persons to benefit from nature when they want government companies to get more oil, and they cite the rights of nature to be protected when they want to extort money out of foreign companies, which, by the way, have a much better track record of environmental protection than government-owned companies. Aside from guaranteeing anything and everything that a human being could possibly ever desire, including all of the goods, the Constitution of Ecuador also structures the government in a way unlike any other country in the world. For starters, unlike the US, Canada, all of Western Europe, Angola, Sudan, Egypt, China, Russia, and any government that I had the patience to Google, Ecuador doesn't only have 3 branches of government, but rather has 5. There's the three branches of government that are common to almost all democracies: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch of governments. And there's also two wacky additions: the transparency and social control branch of government and the electoral branch of government. Now, the electoral branch of government is admittedly less wacky out of the two. While it is called a separate branch of government, it carries out the same functions that most legislative branches carry out around the world. Essentially, it organizes elections and referendums. As far as I can tell, a separate branch of government was created to carry out these functions to make it look like there is a lot of distance between the people who are elected and the people who set up elections. Unfortunately, elections still tend to be heavily contested, ironically much more so than in countries that have not centralized this electoral function to a particular agency. This is because centralizing the electoral function comes with problems. The problem with this centralized approach, and why most countries don't emulate the Ecuadorian model, is because by centralizing the electoral function, you are concentrating into the hands of a few people the ability to potentially rig elections. So I honestly don't think that the electoral branch of government has been very useful. A more decentralized approach, like what we find in the United States or in Canada, would be better. Finally, let's talk about the really wacky part of government, the Orwellianly named transparency and social control branch of government. So according to the Constitution, this branch of government was set up to promote public engagement in politics as well as prevent and combat corruption. Sounds great. When has more bureaucracy ever failed to prevent corruption, right? Actually, what happened is that Ecuador's corruption index dramatically increased after the creation of this so-called fifth branch of government. What's worse is that this branch of government thrust fringe and unqualified candidates to positions of political power because of the nonsensical way that these people are elected. If you want to lead this branch of government, you need only get enough votes to be in the top 7% of candidates, even though perhaps 95% of the population didn't vote for you. Then you just convince the other 6 candidates to put you in charge. Case in point, the current leader of this branch of government is Father Jose Torres, who is a socialist priest that believes that God sent him to exorcise the soul of Ecuador, which sounds amazing, right? But actually just turns out to be him trying to maintain his position of power and trying to maintain this fifth branch of government, even though it is broadly unpopular and it is utterly useless at great cost to taxpayers. It should be noted that Torres's only qualification to being in this position of power is having received a whopping 7.21% of the popular vote in an election that cost Ecuadorian taxpayers $4.5 million. In summary, our Constitution is a ridiculous populist mess that promises everything under the sun while failing to even provide a stable foundation for government. A country's rule of law should be founded on the fundamental rights that have had a proven history of effectiveness, not a hodgepodge of convoluted ideas glued together by wishful thinking. Ecuador needs a 21st constitution for the 21st century, founded on the 18th century ideals of classical liberalism that have had a 250-year track record of producing free and prosperous nations. But unfortunately, creating a new constitution will not fix the fundamental problem with Ecuadorian politics, that is, our lack of proper expectations for the role of government. Ultimately, the political culture of the country must be transformed. We must shift our expectation for government from one of a magical wish-granting entity to a government that respects the fundamental rights that have made Western capitalistic democracies so successful by unleashing human potential unfettered by the government. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and economic freedom are foundational for a country's success. Ultimately, good government is a direct result of a population's strong expectations for these essential rights.